Good afternoon and welcome to our afternoon session. Several years ago, due to declining numbers and the aging process, the sisters that I work for, the Sisters of Mercy of the Holy Cross, decided not to take in new members and let the process of completion run its course here in the USA. The journey has been a very emotional one for the sisters, and they are now a member of one of 9 communities in the planning process with the Wisconsin Religious Collaborative. Our next speaker will tell you more about WRC. Sister Theresa Sandok is president of the Servants of Mary, also known as the Servite Sisters, a diocesan institute based in Ladysmith, Wisconsin, which is located in the Diocese of Superior. She holds a PhD in philosophy from the University of Notre Dame and has taught philosophy at St. Catherine University, St. Paul, Minnesota, and Bellarmine University, Louisville, Kentucky, where she also served as Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences and Director of the Thomas Merton Center. She currently serves on the board of the International Thomas Merton Society and was recently appointed Secretary of the Leadership Conference of Women Religious. Please give a warm welcome to Sister Theresa.
After this morning's presentation, I was a little hesitant to introduce my video here. But I must tell you, I became queen of the PowerPoint in LCWR when I showed it to other LCWR leaders. That was the 125 years of my religious community, the Servants of Mary, Ladysmith, Wisconsin, a small community based, as Russ said, in northwestern Wisconsin. And I wanted to show you that at the beginning, just to say that that's like a snapshot of what has been going on in most religious congregations of women religious throughout the United States, and Canada and Europe as well. So we're all in this together. And I'm just delighted to be with you today to talk about the Wisconsin Religious Collaborative. The way this talk came about is our little collaborative group spoke to the communicators in the state of Wisconsin. And when we did, this was early in March, when we did, they said, we think this would be a great topic to present to the communicators in general. So what I've done with this presentation is widen the scope a little, not just to tell you what's going on in Wisconsin, but to give you also a sense of the big picture. So here is an overview of the presentation today, basically 3 parts, and we'll have some time for questions at the end. The big picture is to be able to tell you a bit about the context in which the Wisconsin Religious Collaborative came about. And that context involves what's going on in religious life in the United States and also is somewhat internationally. And then to tell you about our story, the Wisconsin Religious Collaborative, how it came about, what its mission is, what we hope to accomplish, and then some thoughts for communicators, and finally a little time for you to present your thoughts and perhaps ask some questions. So the big picture, what's happening in religious life today? This first chart is from the National Religious Retirement Office. It's up to date, and the National Religious Retirement Office, or NRRO as it's known, operates under the auspices of the U.S. Catholic bishops. And this is the group that once a year has an annual appeal in parishes throughout the country for donations to religious for their retirement needs. Over the last 30 years that this group has been operating, the amount brought in, thanks to the generosity of American Catholics, is over $800 million. And that is the most successful campaign in the history of the Bishops' Conference. And even that $800 million is only a fraction of what's needed for Sisters for Retirement. And priests and brothers as well, because this NRRO serves not just women religious, but men religious as well. Here you see the increments of 10 years. In 1998, there were more wage earners than retired. They're using an arbitrary figure of 70 years old for retired, but if you've been working with women religious, you know a lot of them don't retire at 70 and cease being wage owners. We had one recently retire at age 85 from a full-time position. So, in 2008, you see now that was the first year that on this chart that the retired outnumbered the wage earners. In 2018, again, you see the number increasing, and it says here, by 2028, retired religious are projected to outnumber wage earners by more than 3 to 1. And I can assure you that that's already the case in many religious communities today. Each of those figures stands for 2,000 religious. This is an interesting chart here. It shows you the difference between men religious and women religious when it comes to aging and retirement. In the case of the male religious, they're 50-50 in terms of under age 70 and over age 70. In the case of women religious, you see 21% are under age 70 and 79% over age 70. And these are figures from the most recent year collected, and that would be December of 2017. Now you might ask, why is that the case? Why are women showing their age more on these charts than the men? One of the reasons is that women tend to live longer than men, and so the number of women religious who would be over age 70 would be older in that respect. The other reason, I think, is that men religious communities, most of them, are communities of priests or priests and brothers, and priests are still tending to attract more vocations or bringing them in from other countries as opposed to women religious. I did see some figures that showed that if you just look at those orders of brothers alone, there are about 19 orders of those in the US, their figures are quite comparable to those of women religious. So the attraction of the priesthood to the men's congregation seems to be a factor here. Also, you'll notice that there are quite a few more women religious than there are men religious. 10,000 men religious compared to 33,000 women religious in the US. The decline in the number of religious sisters, that quotation there from CARA. CARA is the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate. That quotation says, the overall change in the population of women religious in the United States over the past 50 years is one of dramatic decline. The decline has been by about 75%. And the blue graph there shows religious sisters in the US overall. The green graph shows my own community, the Ladysmith Servite Sisters. And the point I'm making here, as I was making in the first little piece you saw, is the trajectories tend to be the same across communities. If you look at what's happening in your own community that you serve, it's probably similar if you would put a graph up there. Sister Anne Marie already spoke about the two conferences of women religious in the United States, the two groups. The LCWR, the Leadership Conference of Women Religious, which was established in 1956 and consists of 302 religious institutes, the leadership of those institutes, and represents about 39,000 sisters in the United States. And the second smaller group, called the Council of Major Superiors of Women Religious, they were established a little later in 1992, They have 120 religious institutes and have about 6,000 sisters represented there. So LCWR has about 80% of the women religious. I wanted to bring up this, this contrast or these two groups for a particular reason. Oftentimes you hear that it is the traditional orders that are attracting vocations in the United States, and that the more progressive are not. Leadership Conference of Women Religious might be considered the more progressive group. Most of our sisters do not wear habits. In a way, that's the difference between the two groups. To belong to the Council of Major Superiors of Women, I understand that wearing a habit is a requirement. I must also add that we are hoping that someday these two groups will reunite and become one. But what I wanted to say about the vocations point is this. I've lost my page on my, let's go back here. Here we are. Again, Kara did this wasn't a Kara study, but a study by Johnson, Whitberg, and Gautier. And they said one of the most striking findings regarding new entrants is that almost equal numbers of women have been attracted to institutes in both conferences in recent years. In 2009, LCWR institutes had 73 candidates, 117 novices, and 317 sisters in temporary vows, while CMSWR institutes had 73 candidates, 158 novices, and 304 sisters in temporary vows. I recall that I was surprised when I heard that, because I was also under the impression that the vocations were flowing towards the more traditional orders. The situation is that because there are more institutes in LCWR, even though we're attracting as many vocations overall, they're spread out over more institutes. And so that's an interesting thing to keep in mind when you're talking about what's attracting young people or even older vocations to religious life. This I think is a great quotation from John. When you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted, but when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will tie your belt around you and lead you where you do not want to go. Father Frank Morrissey, an oblate of Mary Immaculate, a canonist from Canada, is the one who first brought this quotation to our minds in the Wisconsin Religious Collaborative. And he was saying that if we sisters, he was talking to women religious, don't do our own planning, someone else will do it for us. So if we don't want to be pulled around by the belt, we better start, taking care of our own matters now. And the other thing he told us was Rome, or Sickle Cell, the Congregation for Religious, wants us to do that as well, and so do our bishops. They would rather that we do our planning and that we get organized rather than them having to take over at some time for us. So I've presented you with a lot of data about diminishment in religious life, the aging of religious, as well as the reduction in numbers of religious. And this particular data presents us with certain challenges, and there are a variety of ways that religious congregations are responding to these challenges. Dan Ward, who's a canon lawyer, a Benedictine, says it's about sustaining the life for the members. That's why we need to make these responses. It has become very clear to me that especially in the last 10 years, there is just a great variety of ways that religious communities in the United States and abroad are taking up the challenge and finding ways to address them. One way is to reduce the number of institutes with the same charism. And this can happen in a variety of ways. It can happen through the consolidation of provinces. Now, provinces are religious institutes that fall under a general administration. So if you are working for a province, they might talk about the generalate. And all of those provinces, then they share a kind of a common constitution, and so they are united already in that sense. Well, what is happening in many cases is these provinces are being consolidated. So I use the example here of the Daughters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul. They had 5 provinces and 2,500 members in 1969, and they consolidated into 2 provinces and 670 members in 2011. There are others too. I'm sure you're sitting here thinking, oh, that happened to our sisters as well. So I'm just using one example in each of these cases, but there are going to be many others too that would share that same kind of resolution of these situations. And what happens when you consolidate provinces is first you have more members and consequently more people to serve the ministry of the Institute in ministry. You have fewer people that you require for leadership. If you've got 9 provinces, you need 9 provincial councils and a generalate. If you've got 2 provinces, now you only need 2 provincial councils and a generalate. If you've got 9 provinces, you need 9 administrative teams, of other people working for you. So you see how consolidation can be a great value in this time to communities. Now, a merger is similar to a consolidation, except in the case of a merger, autonomous institutes with the same charism come together. In other words, there's no generalate, but all of these institutes have existed independently of one another. For example, in this case, the Congregation of the Sisters of St. Joseph, a number of St. Joseph congregations, I believe there were, 7 smaller congregations, decided that they would come together, and each of those congregations essentially dissolved. And they became this one new congregation called the Congregation of the Sisters of St. Joseph. So the merger is a way to respond. And then hybrids of the above, the Sisters of Mercy of the Americas, the Institute, is a kind of a hybrid because that involved both consolidating provinces and also merging independent groups of Mercy Sisters. And they are perhaps the largest religious institute of women religious in the United States. Today they have, I think, something like 2,900 members, so they're very big. And they started out with 9 provinces and 16 congregations. Today they're down to 6 provinces, and they're still reorganizing. In almost all of these cases, too, and the ones that I'm going to talk about next, all of this has happened, or most of it has happened in the last 10 years and is continuing to happen. There's a great deal of activity such as this going on throughout the country. So as I said, one response was to reduce the number of institutes with the same charism, but it seems like another very popular way of addressing this challenge of diminishment is through collaborative relationships. And here we have, again, a variety, and I'm starting with 2 international models. The Canadian religious stewardship is such a model. Raymond Lafond is an executive director of the religious stewardship. And what they did back 10 years ago, 2008, is the group of religious men and women in Canada got together and they said, we need retirement housing, let's work at it together. I might also mention here, speaking internationally, that the challenges are different and the responses are different because, or in part because, the civic relationship to the religious communities are different. In Canada, they don't have the same lack of retirement funding for their sisters because the state supports them in their retirement. So in any case, in Canada, they formed this collaborative model called the Canadian Religious Stewardship, first of all to provide retirement housing for their religious in Canada, and that they did. And then other needs started to arise. In fact, what they did is form a civil corporation, and then they became what we call a PJP, a public juridic person, so they're also canonical. And they initially, as I said, focused on retirement housing, and then they later expanded into providing pooled insurance, investments, and management services. So and they're continuing to evolve. In Austria, there is the Institute of Austrian Orders, and Miriam Whelans is a canon lawyer who helped the Austrian orders form this institute. And their focus was on managing the assets of the men's and women's religious, of the religious men and women's orders. So they manage assets, and the assets include real estate, investments, cultural assets such as art and writings, and the value of the assets remains with the order, but somebody else is managing them. So those are two significant international examples. In Minnesota, we heard about a bit earlier today about the Rochester Franciscans. These are the sisters who are responsible for the start of Mayo Clinic. They have what they call a hospitality relationship with the Poor Clares. The Poor Clares were a group of Poor Clare sisters, Franciscan Poor Clares, based in Minneapolis or Bloomington, Minnesota, which is in that area. And just in February of this year, the Poor Clares, 11 members left, moved their members into a wing of the mother house of the Rochester Franciscans. So they're living there. And I spoke to the major superior there. They said, we consider this a hospitality relationship. In Indiana, we have a covenant relationship. But the interesting thing is, it began with a hospitality relationship. The Oldenburg Franciscans and the Oldenburg Carmelites have what is called a covenant relationship. First of all, in 2008, there were 9 Carmelites left in their monastery. They sold their monastery and they moved in with the Oldenburg Franciscans. And in 2011, a few years later, they made a covenant with the Franciscan sisters. And that covenant provides for turning over the administration of the Carmelite finances when the present community can no longer do it. So they came with 9 sisters, now they have 5, and at some point they'll say, look, we can no longer manage our own finances, and they can feel assured now that the Oldenburg Franciscans will do that for them. Usually, and speaking of a covenant relationship, some of the vocabulary that's used is the more vibrant community and the less vibrant community, or the welcoming community and the other. So the welcoming community in this case are the Oldenburg Franciscans. But covenant relationships, they may have had their day, but they're not going to survive for a long time because there won't be too many communities able to provide that service because, as I said, we're pretty much all in the same boat. So something very interesting then, I just briefly want to say something about the Missouri example, the Collaborative Governance Project. In Missouri, 2 groups of sisters, the Franciscan Sisters of Mary and the Sisters of the Most Precious Blood, both of them living in the St. Louis area, got together and drafted a statute whereby the 2 of them will basically share all of their management functions. Now they put this covenant, it's not a covenant, this statute, this agreement together, I think in 2013. So it's there when they want to implement it, but they still 5 years later have not implemented it. And I'm not sure what the hesitancy is. Perhaps they're just not ready. They think that they can handle their own governance at this point. The last one, though, I think is one of the more interesting approaches that I think will become more and more common. That's a strange word, commissary. In canon law, a commissary is a person who has been appointed the religious superior of another group. And the example here, one of the first commissaries in the United States, is an example of Sister Anne LaCour. She is a sister of the Most Holy Sacrament. She's a sister of the Marianites of the Holy Cross. And the Sisters of the Most Holy Sacrament in 2013 asked the sisters, the Marianites, if they would form a covenant relationship. So they wrote to Rome. They're pontifical. They wrote to Rome. They said, is this all right? Can we go forward? And Rome wrote back, and they appointed Sister Anne the commissary of the Sisters of the Most Holy Sacrament. At the time in 2013, there were 23 of the smaller community, and today there are 12. So basically what Sister Anne LaCour is their major superior. In the last LCWR board meeting, we had a presentation by Sharon Ewert, who is the executive director of the Resource Center for Women Religious. And she talked to us about commissaries and the need for them. They're sort of like the last resort, because there are lots of other things you can do before you become a commissary. You could have other religions on your council if you don't have enough sisters to form a full council. You could even ask to have lay people appointed to your council, and that has happened in the United States. So basically what I've tried to show you here in this opening is to say a lot is happening in the United States now, and it has really started flourishing in the last 10 years. People are looking at all kinds of models and doing what works for them. One of the ways that we're trying to respond is the Wisconsin Religious Collaborative. Something new and different from all of those models I told you about. LCWR Region 9 is the region of the Leadership Conference of Women Religious that covers the state of Wisconsin. We're a region that is just in the state of Wisconsin. Some of our other regions cross states and so forth, but in a sense we have an advantage by being Wisconsin-based. And there are 14 Wisconsin-based institutes of women religious in Wisconsin. They range in size from 20 to 400 members, so very diverse in size. 7 have under 100 members, 7 have over 100 members. 4 have under 50 members. 3 are diocesan, my group is diocesan, and 11 are pontifical. The group that Russ works for is one of those pontifical groups. 10 have generalates in the United States, and 4 have their generalates abroad. We looked at the census projection for the 14 communities in Region 9, and this is what we came up with. This was a study we did in 2015, and the projections here are those projections that come out of NRRO using the Mercer actuarials, and they're quite correct or accurate in projecting where sisters are going to be in the future in terms of populations. So you see the blue there are the sisters who are age 90 or over. The green section, the sisters in their 80s. The yellow, the sisters in their 70s. The red, the sisters in their 60s. And the little lavender cap there, the sisters who are below age 60. One of the things that you can see as you look at this chart is, if you look at the numbers, in 2015 we had about 2,200 sisters in the state, or in these state-based congregations. They might be working outside of the state, but they're members of those congregations. In 2020 we project that we'll have 1,672, and in 2025, 1,169. And what's significant here is that every 5 years, we go down by about 500 sisters. So that's what we're looking at in terms of projections. And this next table shows you the data that these graphs are based on. Now, we asked our sisters too, and in fact, I just asked them again recently because these answers keep changing. Are you actively seeking vocations? And 9 of those 14 said yes, and 5 said no. But even in the 5 that said no, some of them said, well, we don't have a vocation director, we don't have money in a vocation program, but if somebody came to us and was seeking to enter our community, we would consider it. So the no isn't always a real solid no. In some cases it is, but not in all cases. But I think this is interesting too. I asked them also, what about women in formation? And we looked at the 2015 figures compared to the 2018 figures. Remember again, we have 14 congregations. In 2015, we had 2,200 members. In all of those congregations, we had 1 candidate, 4 novices, 7 temporary professed, for a total of 12 people in initial formation. In 2018, this year, we have 1 candidate, 2 novices, 7 temporary professed, for a total of 10 members in temporary formation. And that also, on the side there, you'll see 7 of the 14 communities had no one in formation in the U.S. in 2015, so half of them then. And today, 9 of the 14 have no one in formation. And so this leads me to Carol's end statement. We're all in completion, some of us just don't know it yet. I want to go back to that one just a minute because I wanted to read you this notion of completion. I think we're struggling with the language to use about what's happening with us, but I want to read you just a statement from Dan Ward. I mentioned him before, a canon lawyer and civil lawyer who's worked a lot with religious communities. And he said this: "A religious institute is called into being by the Spirit at a given time, within a given cultural context, for a particular mission. Just as the Spirit calls the institute into being, the Spirit also may call a religious institute to its completion. Completion is not a failure, but the end of a particular journey of faith that moves aside now because the Spirit is calling in a new way for the new time and the new cultural context." And when you talk to women religious and who are experiencing this completion, that really is the attitude with which we come to that reality and accept and journey with that reality of our completion. All right, here we have a little cartoon. On the door it says Chapter of Elections, and the caption says, "The next leader will be chosen by a show of hands. The one who can still raise her hand will be leader." I got that from a sister of St. Joseph, by the way. Yes, some of us are getting close to that situation. We polled our sisters in Region 9, our leaders, and we asked them what were their top concerns, and there was a whole long list. And interestingly, the top 5 didn't include retirement financing, but rather the very top one, the shrinking leadership pool. We just don't have people available anymore to serve in the leadership role, or very few people available. Declining membership was the second. Recruitment of new members, availability of vocation ministers, and availability of formation ministers. I was just talking to somebody earlier who was saying that we really need to do something collaboratively with our formation and vocation people because we can't keep doing it alone. So I want to tell you about our story. We did the survey, and after that, Sister Pat Cormack, and that's the Sister of the Holy Cross in the community that Russ works for, she put out a call to all of us in Region 9 and said, "I'd like to have a meeting. Let's come before our regional meeting and let's talk about the possibility of doing something collaboratively." So it was open to anyone who wanted to come, and guess what? Everybody came. The need was real. And we talked about what our needs were, and then we agreed to form a working group. And these are the members of the working group, and if you'll notice, there are different initials after each name there. Holy Cross, Salvatorian, Servite, Franciscan, and the congregation of the Sisters of St. Agnes, Agnesian. So, and almost all of us are the major superiors of our communities. And then we also hired a facilitator, Maureen Gallagher, from the Reed Group. One of the first things we did is we said, if we're going to do this right, we need some funding for planning. And we first asked our own members to make a contribution, and we got $18,000 from those 14 congregations. And then we went out looking for grants, and we got $75,500 in grants from 2 different foundations. And so that gave us a nice amount to start our planning with, the $93,000. We held a meeting with consultants. We wanted to start out getting some good advice. And this meeting, when I say we, again, I'm talking about that working group, got together with our facilitator and these consultants. A civil law attorney, Dennis Pertel, who has done a great deal of work in the Milwaukee area. By the way, if you're not too familiar with Wisconsin and the Catholic Church in Wisconsin, Milwaukee is the archdiocese, and it also has both in the archdiocese and around it, the largest number of religious congregations. So Dennis Pertel had done a great deal of work with the archdiocese, so he was a natural, and he had worked with almost all of our religious congregations at some time. In canon law, we brought in Frank Morrissey from Canada. I had mentioned him earlier. And Kelly Connors, the sister who worked with those sisters in St. Louis. And in finance, we have our own very fine resources, Hertha Longo, who's a sister of St. Agnes, and Scott Wallenfels, a Salvatorian priest. So we got together, we talked about what we wanted to do, and a little later I'll show you, even at that meeting, we came together with a mission statement with some assumptions about what we wanted to do, and we were ready to go. And in 2016, we just did a great deal of research. We surveyed, again, brought up to date our LCWR 9 congregations. We conducted a review of the literature. And by that I mean we went to, the major source that we went through was the Resource Center for Religious Institutes. And we looked at all of the articles that and videos that had been produced about collaboratives. And then we used part of our funding to ask a couple of sisters to write executive summaries of those. And then we published that. We gave it back to RICRE to publish on their website. One of our granting groups said that whatever you do, we want you to share your information with others. So we have continued to do that throughout our time. We interviewed leaders of 10 institutes engaged in various collaborative projects. And we investigated the Canadian and Austrian models. In fact, we interviewed both of those people I mentioned by Skype, LaFond and also Miriam Whelans. The next year, we developed our organizational plan, presented it to the congregations. We brought them all together for a meeting in August. And out of those 14, we got commitments from 9 congregations. Now, what you'll see in a bit is one of those congregations was actually from Chicago, not from Wisconsin at all. So 8 Wisconsin and 1 Illinois congregation. We developed a funding model because, of course, we're not going to have grants forever, so our participants have to chip in to help the organization along, and we drafted our articles and bylaws. And this is our mission statement. The Wisconsin Religious Collaborative exists to provide a sustainable membership organization that promotes good stewardship by sharing resources and professional expertise in finance, management, pastoral care, governance, and other areas in order to sustain mission and meet the needs of individual religious institutes in Wisconsin and their members. I go back to promotes good stewardship. Father Scott Mullenfels, a Salvatorian, always says, what we don't spend on ourselves, we have available to spend on mission. There's a good reason to try to do things in a way that promote good stewardship, because then we can do what we were founded to do to begin with. These are the assumptions on which the collaborative is based. And some of them are rather obvious. Consecrated life is changing. New circumstances need new responses. We believe that collaboration will strengthen consecrated life. And there will be varying levels of participation based on need. Not every congregation is going to need the same things or to the same degree. So participation will be based on the realities of each institute. Spirit-led transitions call for proactive planning. Transitions happen in different time frames. The different institutes that you saw, from 20 members to 400 members, are going through different stages of transition. And finally, today's responses have their time and place. This is not meant to be forever, what we're doing, but it's supposed to address the concerns that we have today. And these are the operational principles at the foundation of what we're doing. We want to respect the identity and charism of each institute. And that's important because what we're hoping this will do, this Wisconsin Religious Collaborative, allow our congregations to remain independent and autonomous as long as they can. Respect the dignity of all persons, ensure the pastoral and spiritual care of members. So at some point, if the religious leaders can't manage to do it, or with their own staffs, we will have people available to do it through the collaborative. Be welcoming, flexible, and creative. Free leaders to lead and members for ministry. What a lot of leaders are doing today, people in my position, is not necessarily leadership, but management. And thanks to people like you, we're handing over that management to other people little by little. But we're still very much highly involved in the management aspect, and we want to use the collaborative to do those governance and management functions and allow our leaders to lead, that is, be concerned about the members and the mission. And free our members for ministry. Not every young person or middle-aged person who enters a community is interested in going into leadership right away or ever. nor are they always really candidates for that type of role. And so we'd like our members to be able to minister. And model sustainable cooperative stewardship of resources, and as I said before, we're sharing our learnings with interested others. This is what the structure of the organization we put together. There are Tier 1 founders. We call them Tier 1 founders. That's the 9 groups that I mentioned earlier, because they are the founding group, and there may be other levels of participation. These would be the ones with the ultimate governance authority. To them, a board of directors reports, and the Tier 1 founders appoint a member from each of their groups. There'll be an executive, or there is an executive committee, an executive director, and these various functions, collaborative services, will be provided through the executive director, such as finance, management, pastoral care, governance, and so forth. The executive director will be coordinating those services, and then they will be the services for these various 9 institutes. Here you see the names of the congregations, and I'm naming them here for a specific reason. I want you to notice all the different dioceses there. Milwaukee, La Crosse, Superior, Madison, Green Bay. Those are the 5 dioceses in the state of Wisconsin. So we have members from every diocese in Wisconsin, as well as 1 group from the Archdiocese of Chicago. And this brings you up to date with our story. We're basically organized now. We are a civic corporation. We filed our articles and bylaws, or our articles with the state, and we're listed now in the official Catholic directory through the Archdiocese of Milwaukee. These are the kinds of services we see this group providing. Serve as a clearinghouse for available services and personnel. Sharing management resources such as finance office personnel, justice and peace coordinator, communication director, wellness coordinator. Assisting the member congregations in assessing their management needs. Identifying possible sources to meet the needs, including outsourcing beyond our members. And initiating collaborative ventures such as pooled investments for ministry funds, pooled risk insurance. Really, there are a whole variety of things, and we're still needing to see what the member groups most or really need at this time. We are looking now for an executive director, and there was a flyer in your welcome bag. We're looking for a person who may be a religious, who has leadership experience in her community, or a lay person with leadership experience with the Religious Institute. And the flyer tells you more about the type of situation we're looking for. I just want to say a few thoughts for communicators. I was thinking of this quote this morning when Anne-Marie was speaking, the quote from Pope Francis: "Communication is an art learned in moments of peace in order to be practiced in moments of difficulty." This came to mind because certainly she was a communicator who practiced this art in moments of difficulty while LCWR was going through the investigation that the Vatican had imposed upon us. And Anne-Marie did such a wonderful, wonderful job for us, and she really needs to be congratulated for that. So just want to acknowledge that. But I'm sure you've all had moments of difficulty where you've needed your skills as well. I have to acknowledge Jan Parrott, one of your board members here, for this question: how do we wish to be portrayed? And I'm talking about we religious women religious, because I said to her, Janet, it says here I'm supposed to say something to communicators to help them along, but that's you're the experts. How am I supposed to help you? And she said, well, just tell us, how do you women religious want to be portrayed? And I said, well, that's easy enough. I can do that. We want to be portrayed truthfully in all our complexity. No one story presents the whole picture. Each story reflects a part of the whole. These different stories are interwoven, interdependent, overlapping, and they happen simultaneously. And just as every community of sisters is unique, so too are their stories, but there are certain overarching themes. And one is the story of loss, the stories of loss that you will know about. That's what we've been talking about here today. That's why the collaborative has been formed. But the important thing to see is that's just one small part of the picture. The loss is great, the grief is real, these stories need to be told. We're divesting ourselves of mother houses, cherished ministries. We religious women are now experiencing the death, not just of the older sisters, but now of our cohorts, because we too are the older sisters. One of our consultants said, just remember, sisters don't die in chronological order. So, the stories of loss have to be told. The stories of faithfulness, and by that I mean that we sisters continue to do what we were called to do. In whatever way we are able, we feed the hungry, shelter the homeless, visit the sick and imprisoned. The story of Sister Sharon today, that's the sort of story of faithfulness. Stories of hope. The theme of our 2010 assembly was Hope in the Midst of Darkness. Our hope is linked to our faithfulness. We believe that if we continue to do what we were called to do, the future will turn out the way that God intends. Stories of joy. I think one very simple and powerful story of joy I can relate to you happened at our LCWR assembly. We come there 700 strong, 700 women or so, large conference. And of course, we just go about our business as we normally do. And one day, a gentleman was stuck in an elevator with about 10 sisters, and they heard him remark, "This hotel is filled with happy women." Oh, what a lovely thing, huh? A story of joy. And with all the talk of completion, diminishment, dying, there's an underlying strain of joy. There's a lightness to us, a playfulness that permeates our lives and interactions. Stories of transformation. I think these may be the kind of hardest to get at, but perhaps the most important, because something new is happening in religious life. Carol Zinn she distinguishes between change and transformation in this way. She says, change is when you just have a different form, a function of the same entity. You can think of the change in the way we dress. We went from a habit to a modified habit to lay clothes. But the form is the same, that is, they're clothes, and the function is the same, to cover the body. So that's a change. But a transformation is the sort of thing that happens when when a caterpillar turns into a butterfly. Carol says, a butterfly is not just a tweaked caterpillar. So something new is happening that we don't even perceive yet, and perhaps you, as looking at religious communities, can help us discover what that is. And that leads to new life, stories of new life. What are the new things happening? Our past president in LCWR, Theresa Maya, said this, as far as new life: we will become lighter and itinerant. We will be fewer. However, we will be enough. We will be what God needs today. We will bring with us our call to community and our stubborn conviction that Christ suffering in God's people requires our response. And on that, I'm going to end, because I haven't left you much time to ask questions if you have them. So thank you so much for your attention and for letting me be here with you. I think we have 5 minutes. Yes. The question, what's the response to the collaboration publicly? And so far we've talked to the bishops of Wisconsin, we've talked to the Wisconsin treasurers, we've talked to various religious groups. But as far as actually talking to the public outside of these religious groups, we haven't done much of it at all. When we did suggest a news release on it, we had some communities that were a little hesitant because they're connecting the collaborative just with completion. So if you're a member of the collaborative, they assume that this is a community coming to completion in the sense of dying very soon. So that is where we can use your expertise, because it's not just about dying, although it is for some of us. You know, that's part of that Paschal mystery. You don't talk about the resurrection without talking about the death. So these two things are happening simultaneously. Is there a way of helping our public see that this is one reality and it's also part of a larger reality, that something new is emerging? I'll just say a word about the something new. I think the something new very much involves the engagement of the laity in the mission of the sisters. I haven't said anything about associate members, but that's really, that is one of the aspects of our future. So I think maybe part of the way of communicating would be to make sure that you don't just focus on the one aspect of the picture, but that's what I was trying to do at the end. If, as much as possible, bring in the whole. Is there another? There's a question there. The question is, when the executive director comes into place, how will she relate to the management structures and personnel in these various congregations? I would have to answer that's a work in progress. The executive director, we're looking for someone who can help us create that new relationship, because different communities are going to need different things. My community is one that really needs a wellness coordinator. We are 35 sisters now. We don't need a full-time wellness coordinator, but could the executive director say, look, these sisters over here, they have a person who could serve their community and yours. We don't need her full-time. So that's how I would see one of the ways that this would happen. But as I say, it's a work in progress, and we'll have to work that out. We are still emerging in terms of the whole structure. Yes. The question is, do any of the member organizations have nonprofits that have separated out, and will this bring them back together? Many of them still have nonprofit organizations. My community doesn't anymore. We have divested ourselves of them. But there is no intention of bringing the sponsored ministries back. And this organization is not meant to assist with the sponsored ministries, but rather the internal governance of the congregation. Yes, in the back. Is there a time frame for how this will emerge? Well, our hope is to have our executive director in place by January. The deadline for applications is November 1st. So we hope to have someone in place, and I would think the first thing the executive director would be doing is going and interviewing each of those 9 congregations and saying, now what is your need at this time? And then bringing that back to the board and to the executive committee and saying, what services can we start providing? So in terms of a time frame, I can't give you that as an answer, but we want it to evolve as quickly as possible because the needs are there already. We could have used it a couple years ago, in fact. So, well, thank you so much for your attention. It was nice being with you.